Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back to a time when buttons reigned supreme, corsets still creaked, and the idea of sliding tiny metal teeth up your trousers sounded suspiciously like black magic. We're talking 1913, and a strange little invention is being quietly introduced to a world that isn't quite sure whether to laugh, gasp, or shrug. It's called the zipper, and spoiler alert, it does not immediately change everything. Picture this. You're at a trade exposition, probably somewhere slightly damp, maybe Cleveland or Baltimore, a place where people still wear wool year-round and faint respectably. There are rows of exhibits, the scent of ink and pipe smoke, and the distant click of a telegraph tapping out someone's latest boring invention. And then you see it. A man standing behind a modest wooden booth, his table cluttered with small metal strips, tiny toothed contraptions that glint in the gaslight. A small sign above reads something like, "Hookless fasteners, speed meets style," though the words are optimistic, it's at best. You walk up out of curiosity, arms folded, and listen as the man fumbles through a rehearsed explanation about how this ingenious device might one day replace buttons. You probably won't survive this kind of excitement. Okay, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I love seeing the sleepy geography of our little history club. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean closer to the table, the man demonstrates. He pulls a tiny slider, and the interlocking metal teeth draw together like something out of a magician's act. You expect applause. There is none. Just one curious eyebrow from a woman in a feathered hat, and a skeptical grunt from a man who still thinks trousers should be buttoned from the knee up. The zipper, or more accurately, the separable fastener, as it's referred to in those early days, does not immediately dazzle the crowd. There's no viral sensation, no chorus of tailors gasping in unison. Most people squint, nod politely, and move on to the booth giving away free soap samples. And yet, there it is, quietly revolutionary, or at least quietly irritating to the button makers of the world. The thing about the zipper is that it solves a problem most people don't even realize they have. Yes, buttons are slow. Yes, they can pop off at inopportune times, but they're familiar. And this new invention, it looks fiddly. Small teeth, tiny parts, and a slider that seems like it's one accidental tug away from turning your trousers into a metal-trimmed disaster. And then there's the sound, that soft, metallic zip, like a whisper between gears. It's oddly futuristic, yet utterly mundane. You imagine showing it to your grandfather and him recoiling in horror, or worse, poking it with a stick and muttering something about devil hinges. Historians still argue whether the zipper's first public debut in 1913 really happened at a formal expo, or more quietly through trade catalogs sent to tailors and department stores. Some claim it was shown at the 1913 National Hardware Show. Others argue for the Chicago Textile Exchange. The truth, like most things from the early 20th century, is lost somewhere between newspaper clippings and corporate optimism. What we do know is that 1913 marks the point where Gideon Sundback, yes, we'll meet him properly in a bit, finalizes the hookless number 2, the first zipper reliable enough to actually use without cursing at it. It's patented, it's demoed, it's real, and it's underwhelming. You hover near the booth a little longer, watching as a clerk demonstrates the zipper on a canvas pouch. He slides it shut, then open, then shut again. He smiles, hopeful, like a magician trying to impress a room full of engineers. A few people nod. One woman takes a brochure. Someone else asks if it works on shoes. It does, kind of. You notice that the fastener still looks industrial, more utility than fashion. It's not delicate. It doesn't flirt. It clamps, like something made to seal an airlock or restrain a particularly stylish badger. But here's the odd thing. The zipper doesn't vanish. It doesn't storm the world either, but it lingers. It hangs out in catalogs. It shows up in trade journals. People start to whisper about its possibilities. One ad suggests it could revolutionize traveling luggage. Another imagines it on military boots. And a few brave souls, the real dreamers, begin to think, what if clothing? You're not quite convinced yet. Neither are they. But the seeds are planted, the slow, sleepy kind, the kind that sprout not with applause, but with paperwork, hesitance, and a little pinch of gentle mockery. You turn your head slightly on the pillow and wonder, could you trust such a thing? A sliding metal strip to hold your clothes shut? Your dignity? Your secrets? Maybe not yet. But it's coming. Zip. You're still standing there at the booth, or maybe sitting now on a creaky folding chair, elbow propped on the armrest, watching the whole strange thing unfold. The clerk has moved on to demonstrating the fastener on a small child's shoe, much to the child's dismay, and you begin to wonder, who exactly made this? Who wakes up one day and thinks, you know what would really improve my life? Replacing dozens of buttons with a noisy metal track. That would be Gideon's son back. You've never met Gideon, but tonight you will. Close your eyes and imagine a man with a soft expression, a high forehead, and the air of someone who'd rather be diagramming in peace than trying to sell anything to anyone. Born in Sweden, trained in Germany, and eventually landing in the United States, Sundback is what you'd call a persistent tinkerer. Not flashy, not loud, just the kind of man who quietly stares at a broken clasp and thinks, no, this can be better. You walk into his workshop now, small, spare, and littered with tiny metal components that resemble insect skeletons. The air smells of oil, ink, and anxiety. There's a half-drunk mug of coffee on the workbench, gone cold since sunrise, and in the center of it all, a row of failed fasteners, each a variation, on the same theme, tiny hooks, coils, duck clasps, little metal puzzles that almost work. Sunback isn't the first to chase this dream. He's not even the second. Whitcomb Judson had tried before him, he of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair fame, but Judson's clasp blocker jammed more often than it fastened and required more maintenance than a steam engine. It was an optimistic mess. But Sunback, he's different, quietly obsessive. His wife, Elvira, who tragically passes away young, was the daughter of his employer, the man funding the Hookless Fastener Company. Some say her death drove Sundback deeper into his work. Others argue it was just his nature. Historians still debate how much grief played into his long, solitary tinkering sessions. Either way, he doesn't stop. He makes diagrams. He files patents, and in 1913, after years of prototypes and pinched fingers, he finalizes the design that will eventually be known as the zipper. It's called the Hookless Fastener No. 2. Catchy, right? You're handed one now, delicately, like it might bite. It's small, mechanical, surprisingly sleek. 2 rows of tiny metal teeth, perfectly symmetrical. A slider glides over them, forcing each tooth into its mate like a ballroom of dancers taking each other's hand at the exact right moment. Slide up, slide down. It works. Sunback's genius isn't just the teeth, though. It's the spacing, the precision. He figures out that each tooth must fit perfectly, and that the slider must be slightly flared on the bottom to part them gently without force. You run your thumb along it now and feel that little magic click as the pieces mesh together. But no one's applauding just yet, because this is 1913 and mechanical miracles are common. Telegraphs buzz, automobiles backfire in the streets. There are typewriters, cash registers, door buzzers. The zipper, though clever, is just one more whirring contraption in a world already overclocked with invention. And fashion doesn't want to hear about functionality. Not yet. The zipper will have to wait. Back in his workshop, Sunback keeps filing patents, not just one or two, dozens, little refinements, each one painfully dull to read, but essential to getting the thing to behave reliably. He keeps sending letters, he keeps talking to salesmen, keeps shipping samples to anyone who might be interested in replacing their buttons with something streamlined. You stretch out now, pillow soft beneath your head, and wonder what it must have been like to invent something so useful, only to watch it gather dust. Historians still argue whether Sunback knew just how big it would eventually become. Some say he had complete confidence. Others think he was just trying to fix a small problem for a niche market. But he never seems to give up. There's no tantrum, no dramatic exit. He just keeps fiddling. And slowly, silently, the zipper begins its long, slow crawl into the world. And tonight, you rest your cheek against the linen and imagine being one of those early adopters, trying it out for the first time, sliding the metal up your shoe or coat and thinking, well, that's strange, but not bad. Maybe even a little satisfying. It doesn't shout its arrival. It doesn't demand respect. It just works. And that's where everything begins. You lie there, pillow shifting just slightly as your thoughts roll backward through time, and you wonder, how did we get to Sunback? Surely this marvel of interlocking teeth didn't materialize from the ether. You stretch your legs under the blanket and trace the trail even farther back, to a city humming with factories, soot, and ambition. Welcome to Chicago in the 1890s, where ideas are louder than the trolleys and half as practical. You wander into the workshop of Whitcomb Judson, a man with a talent for complicated solutions to simple problems. It's noisy in here, full of gears, levers, and the smell of scorched machine oil. You sidestep a coil of copper wire and approach his workbench. There it is, the original, the awkward, the ever-jamming clasp locker. Imagine a metallic ribcage stitched into a boot or corset. Tiny hooks meant to hold two strips of fabric together, joined by a sliding mechanism that looks like it might belong in a dentist's toolkit. You reach for it. It resists. You pull harder. Now it's stuck. The assistant next to you shrugs, as if to say, yeah, that happens a lot. This was Judson's gift to the world, a closure system that almost worked. Historians still argue whether the clasp locker ever worked reliably. Some say it was a proof of concept, an engineering sketch that accidentally made it to market. Others suggest it worked fine if you didn't move much or breathe too deeply. But in truth, most early users found it maddening. It jammed, it misaligned, it snapped, and yet, Judson believed. He promoted it at the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, where gleaming white buildings lined the fairgrounds, and Invention sparkled with promise. His class blocker was displayed alongside marvels like the Ferris wheel and electric kitchen appliances. But amid such dazzling competition, a tiny metal fastener didn't stand a chance. Most people walked past it, barely noticing. You roll onto your side now, pillow creasing gently beneath your ear, and think about those early failures, not just Judson's, but the whole concepts. Inventors kept trying. Inventions kept failing. Each one slightly different, slightly better, but still not quite enough. The key problem? Precision. The earlier designs required meticulous alignment, and even then, the materials weren't strong enough. Threads wore down, teeth bent, sliders slipped. It was like trying to tame a metal, zipper-shaped beast with nothing but hope and a pair of tweezers. One quirky attempt involved magnetic clasps, another tried a rubber strip with embedded hooks. You picture a poor soul in 1902 trying to zip their galoshes, only to have the fastener spring apart, like an uncoiled watch spring. Disappointment became part of the design. Some even gave up entirely. Tailors returned to buttons. Dressmakers sighed and stitched hooks. Children went back to crying over laced boots that took 15 minutes to tie. But a few stubborn minds held on. They saw past the flaws and imagined a future where one smooth motion could bring two halves of fabric together like a tiny miracle. You reach down and imagine zipping your own coat, only this time you have to pull a 3-inch hook and eye apparatus across 30 metal loops. Doesn't quite have the same ring, does it? The funny thing is, Judson wasn't alone in his obsession. A small circle of inventors across Europe and North America were chasing the same dream, independent but parallel. Some in France worked on spiral clasps. A few German tinkerers toyed with coiled spring fasteners, but none caught on. There's a rumor, unproven but persistent, that one early model made it into the dress of a minor duchess attending a garden party in 1905. The zipper failed halfway through a curtsy, prompting both laughter and a fainting spell, and that particular version was never seen again. Failure, it seemed, was the zipper's most reliable feature, but each failure sharpened the vision. Every clunky prototype, every torn hem, every jammed slider added a layer of frustration that would eventually drive someone to get it right, that someone would be sunned back. You pull the blanket higher, the pillow now warm beneath you, and feel the lull of those early struggles. The awkward beginnings, the hiss of trial and error, echoing across decades of sewing machines and says. You picture Judson at his desk, rereading his patent papers, tweaking the angle of a hook, tightening a spring, still believing that this idea had life. He never saw the zipper become what it is now, but he lit the match. And even if his invention wasn't ready for the world, it nudged the right minds in the right direction, and that matters, because progress is rarely clean. It catches on threads, it jams, it fails, until one day it glides. The pillow shifts under your head again, just slightly, as if nudging you toward the next layer of this sleepy mechanical onion. You've seen the early misfires, the fussy clasps, the fainting duchesses. Now you're ready for one of history's slowest forms of excitement, bureaucracy. Tonight, we drift into the whisper-quiet world of patent clerks. You wouldn't expect drama here, and you'd be right. But there's something almost meditative about the rhythm of paperwork, about inventors filing diagrams, with ink still drying, and clerks reading each one with the enthusiasm of a man cataloging different shades of beige. In 1913, Gideon Sundback finally files the design for his hookless fastener number 2, a quiet masterpiece of metallurgy and miniature mechanics. It's his 4th or 5th major submission, depending on how you count, and by now, he's learned to phrase everything just right. The right terminology, the right drawings, the right kind of understated enthusiasm. You step into the patent office now, mahogany desks, dusty curtains, and a smell somewhere between old glue and hopeful failure. Clerks shuffle past with arms full of folders. One of them pauses at a coffee-stained desk and picks up Sundback's application. He reads. He squints. He reads again. He shrugs. Historians still argue whether the lukewarm reception from patent reviewers was due to the invention's complexity or just sheer fatigue. There had already been patents for slide fasteners, clasp lockers, and hook closures since the 1890s. To the clerks, Sundback's design probably looked like just another riff on a recurring theme. Useful, sure, but not world-shattering, and technically it wasn't. The hookless number 2 didn't breathe fire or leap tall buildings. It quietly, efficiently solved a mechanical puzzle most people weren't even aware existed. It was too competent, just shy of thrilling, and in a world obsessed with telegraphs, combustion engines, and the romance of flight, a little metal strip didn't exactly dazzle. Still, the patent went through. Eventually, you lean into the pillow, tracing the slow shuffle of paper through hands and ink stamps. You imagine clerks as debating over phrasing. Is this a slide clasp, a fastening assembly, a non-perforated tooth engagement apparatus? That last one probably got laughed out of the room. One quirky tidbit you might appreciate. It's said that one patent reviewer, years later, confessed he never actually tested the prototype. He just looked at the diagram, raised an eyebrow, and thought, well, at least it's symmetrical. A glowing endorsement, truly. But the most curious part isn't the slowness. It's the silence. The hookless number 2 didn't set off fireworks. It didn't prompt press conferences. It just slipped quietly into the records. A few weeks later, it was mailed to a short list of potential buyers who mostly ignored it. You picture Sundback in his office, reading those rejections. No dramatic tear-shedding, no last-minute monologue about misunderstood genius. Just a sigh, maybe another pot of coffee, and back to tinkering. Because that's what inventors do. They wait, and they file more patents. Open scholarly debate persists around how many of Sundback's early designs were commercially viable. Some think the hookless number 2 was a perfected prototype, but still too expensive to produce at scale. Others argue the technology was ready, but the public simply wasn't. Either way, it sat on shelves and in back rooms while buttons continued their smug little reign. Meanwhile, back at the patent office, other inventions passed through. One day, it was a collapsible hat rack. Another, a machine that sliced pickles into uniform cubes. Compared to those, a mechanical garment fastener barely caused a ripple. But what Sundback had done, what almost no one noticed, was monumental in its quiet way. He had made something that worked, consistently, without clogs or jams, without hooks that snagged or teeth that refused to mesh. You nestle into your blanket now, comforted by the fact that somewhere in a forgotten filing cabinet, in a dusty corner of the patent office, there was a folder with Sundback's name and a little diagram. A diagram that one day would go on to close jackets, secure boots, seal spacesuits, and hold together the tiny joys of everyday life. But in 1913, it was just paper. Just another idea in a world full of better funded, louder, more immediately thrilling inventions. No one lined up to buy it. No one gasped. The world rolled on, buttons firmly fastened, laces tightly tied, and tailors muttering about mechanical nonsense. The zipper had been invented, and the world barely noticed. The pillow shifts again beneath your head, not from movement, but from mood. It's 1913, and something is beginning to stir, faintly, beneath the flat layers of public indifference. The fastener has been filed, approved, and quietly manufactured in small batches. It's ready. Now it needs an audience. So tonight, you squeeze your way into a hotel ballroom rented for a modest industry showcase, the kind with heavy velvet curtains, creaky floorboards, and hors d'oeuvres that all taste faintly of lemon. The air smells of starch and tobacco, and the men in starched collars murmur about tariffs and thread counts. This is where the zipper, then still clumsily referred to as the hookless slide fastener, makes its debut. You wander over to the booth. It's simple, modest, the sort of table setup more common at school science fairs than revolutionary history. There's a linen backdrop, a stack of folded boots, and 3 sample pouches fitted with Sunback's latest creation. A man, very likely a hired rep, not Sunback himself, delivers a quiet pitch. He demonstrates the fastener. He does it again. Someone in the audience mumbles, "Clever." Another says, "Too fussy." One reaches forward to try it, only to jam the slider halfway down. The rep winces but smiles. Historians still argue whether this event was a trade show or a product demo arranged through the Universal Fastener Company. The details blur, but the mood remains clear, polite confusion. You linger, like a curious cat near a wind-up toy. You tug on one of the samples. It's oddly satisfying, just enough resistance to make you feel involved, but not so much that it bites back. You tug again, a small thrill, a few inches of closure achieved with a whispering zist. It's satisfying, but strange. And strangeness in 1913 is not an easy sell. The crowd thins. Salesmen drift off toward a brassiere prototype and a new steam-powered suitcase wheel. The zipper booth is left in the corner, folded pamphlets resting undisturbed. Still, a few notices go out. Some fabric companies take samples. A few orders roll in, not enough to change fashion, but enough to keep Sunback's workshop busy, mostly for bags, boots, tool pouches, utility gear, not clothing, not yet. You imagine a New York haberdasher reading a flyer over his lunch, half interested, dribbling mustard onto a drawing of the hookless number 2. He considers trying one on a vest, but dismisses it. Too mechanical, he says aloud. Looks like something for shoes. The zipper wasn't sexy, not then. It was too practical, too strange, too new. And worse, it required a whole new way of sewing garments. Tailors would have to reshape the design around it. That meant effort, retraining, risk. No tailor in 1913 wanted to explain to a well-paying customer that their trousers came with an experimental metal contraption instead of dependable buttons. Still, the fastener began to trickle in. Slowly, open scholarly debate continues about whether the initial release in 1913 was intended for fashion or utility. Some say Sunback hoped to revolutionize everyday clothing. Others argue he focused on industrial use, military gear, boots, bags, tents. Regardless, the fashion world mostly shrugged. But utility? That's where things got interesting. You shift under your blanket and feel the pulse of a new kind of customer. Not the Paris couturier, but the working man, the traveling salesman, the baggage handler, the postman. People who needed something reliable, quick, and hard-wearing. For them, the fastener was promising, even if no one quite trusted it yet. One oddity. The zipper made its first major inroads in tobacco pouches. Of all things, the industry needed a closure that kept the product dry, but was faster than string ties. A few pouch manufacturers added zippers to their leather cases, and smokers noticed. That small spark kept the fastener in the game, not stylish, not widespread, but alive. Tonight, the ballroom empties. The booth is packed up, the samples are rolled in cloth and taken away. The rep sighs, checks his pocket watch, and heads for the station. But one man, maybe a tailor, maybe a textile buyer, keeps the brochure. He folds it carefully and tucks it in his coat. A seed is planted. You feel your pillow settle beneath your head again. No applause, no headlines. But the zipper, tooth by tiny tooth, has entered the room. It's quiet. But it's here. You're back in motion now, gently rocking down a cobbled street in a carriage, past rows of shuttered storefronts and awnings pulled low against the late afternoon sun. The shops glow with the soft sepia of the early 1910s. Corset shops, lace houses, hat stands, and sewing circles tucked just out of view in back rooms filled with teacups and cautious gossip. Because if you really want to understand how the zipper was received in 1913, you can't stay at trade expos and patent offices. You have to go where the needles click, where the hemlines rise and fall with breath, and where quiet authority lives. The domestic sewing room. So tonight, we let ourselves into one. Gently, no need to knock. A group of women sit in a semicircle, hands busy, eyes squinting under lamplight. One is patching a child's pinafore, another is threading buttons onto a blouse, and in the corner, a small package sits unopened, sent from a cousin's husband's brother who works for a company with a new kind of fastener. The room leans in. The woman holding it opens the box, revealing 2 lengths of twill tape lined with small metal teeth and a tiny slider that looks suspiciously like a miniature guillotine. She demonstrates, tugging carefully, a soft zip. The teeth lock, she unzips, eyes widen, a pause. Then as if on cue, one woman murmurs, "Well, that's unsettling." There's laughter, the kind that's gentle, but definitely judging. Historians still argue whether early women's sewing circles saw the zipper as threat or curiosity. Some claim these domestic gatekeepers viewed it as an affront to proper tailoring. Others suggest they were simply skeptical about anything that required rethinking garments from the seams outward. You imagine them discussing the practicalities. But what if it breaks, says one? What if it rusts? What if it opens by accident? What if it doesn't open when it's supposed to? And in the distance, it looks masculine, doesn't it? There it is, because the zipper, mechanical, loud, linear, felt oddly industrial, a bit aggressive, certainly not delicate, not decorative, not ladylike. You stretch out in bed now and think of how something so small could challenge the rituals of getting dressed. Buttons have rhythm. They encourage pause, modesty, even ceremony. But a zipper? It zips. In a second, the garment's on or off. Too fast, too easy, too suspicious. One curious anecdote, whispered about in old-fashioned circles, involves a seamstress in 1914 who tried to stitch a zipper into the back of a tea gown for a client's daughter. The mother, upon seeing it demonstrated, reportedly gasped and cried, "She'll be undressed in moments. No decent girl needs that kind of speed." Was it true? Maybe. But the fear wasn't about the fabric. It was about control. You feel it now. The shift in the room. The women lean in again. They test the slider. They laugh gently as it jams. One pokes the teeth and says, "Feels like something a man would invent." Another tries it on her wrist and imagines a future where sleeves hug tight and open with a tug. Not unattractive. Still, the consensus? Let's wait and see. The zipper didn't make its grand entrance through fashion magazines or glossy department store windows. It entered through whispered trials like this, through cautious hands and quiet verdicts, through women who knew how clothes were supposed to feel and weren't about to be rushed into something so toothy. You roll your shoulder beneath the blanket. The pillow holds your head with quiet neutrality, not judging, not selling, just supporting, like the sewing circle, sitting in quiet judgment but not dismissing entirely. The zipper earned a side eye, not exile, and in time, some found charm in its strangeness. Open scholarly debate lingers around whether early resistance came more from cultural sensibilities or technical flaws. Did the sewing circles hate the zipper itself, or just the fact that it came from outside, from someone who didn't have to spend hours darning socks or fixing buttonholes? You picture the fastener passed around again, this time with a little less suspicion. One woman tucks it into her mending basket, just to try, just in case. That's how it starts, one stitch at a time, one laugh, followed by a maybe, and beneath it all, the whisper of something new. You're still nestled there, soft pillow beneath your cheek, when your mind slips through a side door in time and into a newsroom, somewhere in New York, maybe Boston, possibly Philadelphia. It's 1913, and the press is chewing on headlines that range from grim to garish. Labor strikes, suffragette marches, new types of chewing gum, and somewhere, in a stack of unimportant announcements, lies a press release for a fastener. You glide between desks, the smell of cheap ink and black coffee thick in the air. Typewriters clack with mechanical urgency, telephones buzz like irritated bees, and a reporter leans back in his squeaky chair, reading the blurb about a hookless slide fastener with thinly veiled confusion. It isn't a headline, not yet, but still, a few inches of column space appear here and there. A small paragraph in the Innovation section of a textile journal, a caption beneath a grainy photograph of a boot, and in one truly awkward piece, a fashion writer refers to it as a toothed dressing aid, which makes it sound more like a bad dream than an invention. Historians still argue whether the term zipper had been coined at this point. It hadn't. That name would arrive later, and we'll get there. But right now, the fastener has no proper identity, just a clunky title and a quiet presence in product announcements few people read. One trade paper, trying very hard to be helpful, describes the device as a linear joining implement with dual engagement capabilities. You can imagine readers blinking slowly at that one. Someone probably spilled tea on it and forgot it ever existed. Yet even in their awkwardness, some writers saw promise. One article notes the fastener's potential to increase efficiency in dressing garments and travel goods, which is the nicest way anyone's ever said this might be slightly less annoying than buttons. A few editors try to spin it as modern, futuristic, a mechanical flourish for the bustling urbanite. One small magazine even runs a sketch of a hypothetical zippered handbag, though it looks more like a lunchbox in distress. Still, nobody's excited. You turn your head softly on the pillow and think about the power of first impressions. How much can hinge, pun fully intended, on how something sounds when introduced. Hookless fastener doesn't exactly sparkle with romance. It sounds like something you'd keep in a toolbox next to a bent nail and a broken shoelace. It didn't help that some writers just didn't know what to compare it to. One editor described it as a reverse button accordion, which is both poetic and totally useless. Another likened it to a toothed railway for cloth, which again sounds cool until you try to imagine it closing your jacket. And there were misunderstandings. One small town paper ran a piece claiming the fastener runs on steam. Another asked if it could double as a sewing machine component. Confusion reigned. The thing was new, yes, but it didn't fit any known category. It wasn't a clasp, it wasn't a button, it wasn't a snap, it was something else. You imagine a sleepy editor late one evening trying to name it, sipping watery coffee and mumbling, "It's just so zippy," then laughing at himself and crossing it out. The word wouldn't catch on until later, but the thought lingers like an echo. One quirky story tucked away in the margins of zipper folklore involves a columnist who received a sample in the mail and promptly used it to secure her typewriter cover. "It did not work," she wrote dryly, "but it did amuse my cat for several days." Even when the zipper failed, it failed in memorable ways. Open scholarly debate surrounds whether these early articles helped or hurt the fastener's chances. Some say the awkward, hesitant coverage gave it a kind of eccentric mystique. Others argue it stalled adoption by making the device sound more complex than it was. But the real problem, there was no story yet, no cultural moment, no scandal, no celebrity endorsement, just a gadget that quietly existed. It would take time for the zipper to find its narrative. For now, it lived in column inches and curiosity, in toy catalog footnotes, in novelty sections of general stores. It was something to point at, smile politely, and maybe, just maybe, consider the next time your boots took 5 minutes to lace. You pull the blanket higher, your breath soft and even. The world of zippers hasn't opened fully yet. It lingers in whispers and awkward metaphors, but those metaphors are multiplying. And something small, metal, and strangely satisfying is inching toward the edge of relevance. Your breath slows. You feel your body sink just a little deeper into the bed, as if the mattress knows what's coming next. Mud, trench, mud of the kind that oozes into boots and never quite leaves, because now the zipper knocks, politely, on the door of the military. And the military, ever practical, peeks through the peephole and sighs. It's 1914 now. The world teeters on the edge of war. Soldiers across Europe are being issued wool uniforms, leather boots, and gear packed with buckles, snaps, and laces. Dressing a soldier is less about elegance and more about endurance. Things need to stay closed. In the rain, in the cold, insert after crawling through barbed wire. Enter the hookless fastener. A few enterprising suppliers float the idea. Imagine, they say, boots that lace faster, gear pouches that seal with a single motion, coats that don't fumble with buttons when your hands are shaking from frostbite or fear. You're a quartermaster now, sitting at a desk surrounded by crates and requisition slips. A canvas boot arrives on your desk. It has something strange on it. 2 rows of teeth, a tiny handle. You tug it. Zip. The boot closes. You raise an eyebrow. Practical, maybe. Trustworthy? Historians still argue whether the zipper was ever seriously considered by World War I logistics departments. There are scattered references in supply memos, some surviving samples of zippered boots, and even one photograph of a Canadian soldier wearing what might might be an early zippered flight suit. But the consensus? It didn't stick, and that makes sense. Imagine trying to use a zipper in the trenches, where every tool was caked in mud, every moving part rusted in days, and the last thing anyone wanted was a jammed closure when the gas mask needed adjusting. Buttons, as it turns out, are stupidly reliable, even when frozen, even when torn, even when half-chewed by rats. Buttons don't need alignment. They don't care if you've got gloves on. They never jam halfway and scream, "Surprise, you're exposed." You picture a soldier tugging on a jammed zipper, swearing through his teeth, and yanking so hard he rips the boot apart. A nearby officer mutters, "Well, that was clever," and orders a return to standard issue laces by the end of the week. Still, some small experiments continue. Engineers toy with flight jackets. Pilots, especially in the British Royal Flying Corps, begin to eye zippers for their sleekness. In high altitudes, speed matters, and zipping up a coat in 3 seconds versus 30, that's not nothing. A few airmen get their hands on zipper-closed gear. It works, sort of, until it doesn't. One quirky account mentions a flight jacket that froze shut midair. The pilot landed safely but had to be cut out by mechanics using a screwdriver and a small hammer. Not exactly confidence-inspiring. You imagine the military report that followed. Fastener, promising but fragile, needs refinement. Recommend reversion to toggles until further notice. You smile into your pillow. Open scholarly debate remains about just how many zippered items made it to the front. Was it dozens, hundreds, a marketing test run, or just wishful thinking from an industry desperate to break into uniform contracts? One thing's for sure, the zipper had timing. Just not good timing. The war demanded strength, dependability, gear that could survive artillery blasts and 6-day rainstorms. And the zipper, poor, clever, delicate thing, just wasn't ready. But it left an impression. When the war ended, some soldiers remembered it, some had tried it, some perhaps had seen its potential. And when they returned home, cold and mud-soaked memories in tow, they entered a new decade with opinions about buttons, about speed, about what clothing could be. The zipper didn't win the war, but it got its foot, well, its slider in the door. Tonight, the trenches are quiet. The boots are drying, and the little metal fastener waits, quietly, for its next assignment. Not on the battlefield, but in the drawing room, where the stakes, surprisingly, might be even higher. Now you're sitting near lace-draped windows in the back parlor of a dressmaking shop in Boston, or maybe Barcelona, depending on the dream. Either way, the afternoon sun falls in squares across the floor, and a tailor's form stands proudly in the center of the room, wrapped in a half-finished corset. Corsets, the unrelenting ribbed tyrants of the wardrobe, designed to shape, constrict, flatter, and above all, take forever to get into. And this is where the zipper dares to show its shiny little face. You imagine a quiet ruckus unfolding. A traveling salesman, perhaps, always a salesman, has arrived with a leather satchel of wonders, spools of thread, a catalog, and inside, a prototype corset fitted not with hooks, eyes, or endless rows of tiny buttons, but with a zipper. The dressmaker holds it up, squints, tugs, zip. The corset cinches shut with a single fluid motion. No tugging, no swearing, no assistant elbow deep in your bodice, just closed. You can hear the silence. Then comes the laughter, soft at first, and then louder, the kind of laughter that says, "Oh, sure, and next you'll invent a corset you can breathe in." Historians still argue whether corset manufacturers of the time ever seriously tested the zipper for everyday use. There's evidence that a few novelty garments were fitted with early fasteners, usually evening corsets or novelty loungewear, but widespread adoption, not quite. Why? Because the zipper, for all its cleverness, offered speed, and speed, in this case, was scandalous. Getting dressed in 1913, especially if you were a woman of fashion, was a ritual, a statement, a process often assisted by someone else. It wasn't meant to be quick. A corset that could be zipped up in seconds threatened not just modesty, but the entire social structure built around dressing. There's a well-circulated rumor of a Parisian seamstress who installed a zipper into the back of a ball gown for an American client. The gown fit beautifully, the zipper worked, but word spread quickly that the wearer had arrived late and undressed even faster. A quiet scandal followed. The seamstress returned to her button loops. You shift against your pillow, amused by the idea that too much efficiency could be improper. But this was the Edwardian era, where decorum still clung tightly to the ankles of progress. The idea that a woman could zip herself into a corset, alone, without assistance, that wasn't just practical, it was threatening. And so corset makers, powerful, well-connected, extremely button-aligned, rolled their collective eyes. Open scholarly debate lingers on whether this reaction was about tradition or economics. Was it morality, or just the fact that a good corset with hook and eye closures required specialized labor, materials, and repeat customers? A zipper, if it worked, might mean fewer repairs, fewer fittings, fewer return visits, so they dismissed it, politely but firmly. The zipper was seen as fine for tobacco pouches, maybe boots, maybe a children's coat, but corsets, absolutely not. You picture one such dressmaker snapping her measuring tape and declaring, if a woman can put it on herself, she probably shouldn't. A joke, maybe, but also a warning. Still, whispers continued. One fashion-forward boutique in Berlin reportedly made a run of loungewear with side zippers. A few sold, a few came back, the sliders stuck, the fabric warped, the dream faded, like many's a first draft. You burrow deeper into the blanket, the edges of the story softening, the light fading in that imaginary shop. No corset revolution today. The zipper, for now, stays on the shelf, a strange, slinky little future folded between layers of lace and skepticism, but it's not giving up. It'll try again. You roll gently, one cheek brushing across the pillowcase, as if your dream self is already anticipating the coming tension, not in your shoulders, but in the fastener industry, because tonight we drift into a lesser-known rivalry, the quiet battle between buttons and zippers. On the surface, buttons seemed unbothered. They'd been around for thousands of years. They came in bone, wood, shell, and brass. They were decorative, dependable, even dignified. Zippers, flashy, mechanical. Weirdly, new, and new meant trouble. Now imagine you're in the back office of a well-established button manufacturer in 1913, let's say, for sleepy drama's sake, in Manchester, England. The office is dark wood, with ledgers stacked high and a heavy, authoritative air. You're reviewing trade news, and there it is, tucked between cotton prices and Tailor's Guild gossip, a report about an upstart fastener system being tested on boots and travel bags. You frown. No one has actually said it out loud yet, but there's a shift in the wind, and the button men feel it. Historians still argue whether there was an organized resistance to the zipper from within the button industry. Some claim coordinated lobbying, others believe it was more passive-aggressive, suggestive pricing, favorable trade arrangements, whisper campaigns, and tailor circles. But whatever form it took, the skepticism was real and loud. You shift on your imaginary seat at a Button Guild meeting where a presenter assures attendees that no metal-toothed gimmick can ever replace the grace and reliability of the classic button. Someone claps. A few nod. One man, probably named Archibald, taps the table twice and mutters, "Hear, hear." And yet, a quiet dread hums beneath the bravado. Buttons required skill. Sewing them on was an art. Aligning them properly, a mark of care. A world run by zippers, too fast, too cheap, too easy. You roll back toward your pillow and think about that. How the zipper threatened not just a product, but an entire ethos, the slow, deliberate dressing ritual, the feel of wood or horn under fingertips, the gentle pull of a buttonhole, gone in one mechanical slide. To fight back, button manufacturers leaned into nostalgia. Ads from this period show bucolic scenes, boys in suspenders, girls in pinafores, every one of them lovingly buttoned into existence. The messaging was clear. Buttons are tradition. Zippers, impersonal, cold. A step away from the human touch. One it even warned, you wouldn't bolt your shirt closed, so why zip it? Oh, subtle. Very subtle. Tailors got the memo too. Many avoided the zipper, not out of fear, but out of sheer inconvenience. Sewing a zipper required a different approach. The seams had to align just so. The slider had to rest cleanly. And the teeth, oh, the teeth, couldn't be bent or warped or overstitched. A crooked button was charming, a crooked zipper, a clothing malfunction. So tailors, especially bespoke ones, rolled their eyes. If a client asked about a zipper, they'd often scoff and mutter something about steampunk nonsense or engineer clothing. You picture one threading his needle and saying, "Zippers are for tents, not gentlemen." And the clients? Most just nodded. No one wanted to be the first to walk into the club wearing a fastener no one could name. Open scholarly debate continues about whether these early efforts to discourage the zipper were part of a calculated protection strategy or simply the inertia of comfort. Did button companies really fear it, or were they just too buttoned up to adapt? Either way, the effect was the same. The zipper lingered at the edges, confined to the occasional pouch, the odd boot, a strange little metal tongue that rarely made it into polite society. But it was waiting, watching, one tooth at a time, and it had no intention of going away. You blink, and suddenly, you're not in a dressmaker's parlor or a musty tailor's shop. You're standing in the sweltering summer of 1893 on the dusty fairgrounds of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Yes, we're traveling backward a bit, but don't worry, your pillow travels with you. Here, innovation is on full display. The fair boasts electricity, giant wheels, talking machines, a replica of a Viking ship. If it buzzes, flashes, spins, or smells faintly of grease, it's here, and among the thousands of exhibits competing for the public's attention sits a quiet little booth with an even quieter visitor turnout. You walk past popcorn vendors and barkers until you spot it. A man fiddling with a boot and a sliding mechanism. A modest sign above him reads something vague like clasp locker demonstration, a new age in fastening. That man is Whitcomb Judson. Yes, the very same Judson whose name still clings like a rusted label to the zipper's early ancestry. He wasn't the one to perfect it, but he was the one brave or bored enough to bring it to this fair. You step closer. He slides the clasp up. It catches. He tugs again. It jerks. The boot creaks. People walk by, uninterested. A few glance, wrinkle their noses, and move along toward a vendor selling electrified waffles. No one claps. No one faints. Mostly, it's awkward. Historians still argue whether Judson's showing at the fair had any real impact. The product wasn't market ready. It failed constantly. One journalist wrote that the fastener closed in spirit, if not in function. Ouch. Still, Judson persisted. His clasp locker was designed to replace the tedious lacing on boots, a noble goal. But in reality, it required careful alignment, constant adjustment, and the patience of a saint or someone with extremely flexible ankles. Judson's display at the fair involved a sort of corseted boot that looked like a Victorian scuba shoe. The idea was simple: press the hooks together, slide the clasp, and voila, closed. But voila turned out to be more, well, not quite. You picture Judson, drenched in sweat under a canvas awning, demonstrating the same boot over and over, hoping each time the mechanism wouldn't jam. Sometimes it didn't, sometimes it did. When it failed, he'd chuckle, adjust it, and try again. And yet, despite the setbacks, something stirred. A few people took notice. A few investors scribbled notes. One patent clerk, attending the fair for unrelated reasons, jotted something about mechanical seams with potential. Not the most glowing praise, but not nothing. Judson filed patents. He recruited engineers, he believed. But like so many inventions ahead of their time, the clasp locker stalled. It found no real buyers, no meaningful orders. A few pairs of boots were made. Some were sold. Most were returned. And Judson? He quietly disappeared from the public story. But his work wouldn't vanish. Years later, the very company he helped create would be inherited by a Swedish engineer with a penchant for precision and a tragic love story. Yes, that's Sundback. But for now, you drift through the fairgrounds again, past the spinning Ferris wheel and the chirping phonographs, your feet crunching on gravel, your eyes lingering one last time on Judson's little booth. You whisper a thank you, because even failures leave trails. Open scholarly debate continues over how much of Judson's design Sundback truly built upon, or whether his contributions were more symbolic. Some engineers argue the original clasp locker was closer to a novelty than a prototype. Others believe it was the blueprint that simply needed better materials and fewer stubborn springs. You settle back on the pillow, the echoes of the fair fading, and think about how strange it is that something as unassuming as a zipper could debut in the same place as electric lights and moving sidewalks and be almost entirely ignored. But Judson showed up. He zipped and he jammed, but he showed up. That's how history begins. You're lying still now, pillow as warm beneath your cheek, drifting deeper into the threadbare folds of time. The crowd from the World's Fair fades away, and you begin to hear the hum of something quieter, something less grand, more personal. Not inventions or trade shows this time, but lives, daily lives. The zipper, still lingering in the margins, begins to touch them. Tonight, you find yourself in a small general store, Pennsylvania perhaps, maybe Michigan. The bell jingles softly as you enter. Shelves creak beneath the weight of folded flannel and tins of salve. At the back counter, a storekeeper in rolled sleeves chats with a tobacco pouch salesman. And there it is, a pouch, leather compact, designed to hold pipe tobacco or coins. But instead of the usual press button snap or knotted cord, it's sealed with something new, a zipper Well, not a zipper because it still hasn't earned that name, but a hookless fastener installed with care, stitched just slightly off center. You lift the pouch, tug the slider, zip dart open close. Satisfying. That soft metallic hum. It's one of the earliest instances of the fastener being used regularly and successfully, not on clothing, not in high society, but in the hands of working people, miners, railway clerks, pipe smokers. Historians still argue whether it was the tobacco industry that truly kept the zipper afloat during its slow infancy. What's certain is this. These pouches worked. They sealed better than buttons, faster than cords, and unlike boots or dresses, they didn't need to look beautiful, just functional. You smile softly against the pillow as you imagine a coal miner at the end of his shift, hands blackened, fingers thick, reaching into his pocket for his pouch. A quick zip, no fumbling, no spillage. He nods. He says nothing, but he doesn't go back to buttons. Manufacturers took note. More pouches were ordered, toolkits, coin purses, a few sample handbags. Then came hunting gear, rifle cases, cartridge belts, all featuring the little-toothed miracle that no one could quite pronounce, but everyone found strangely useful. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. You roll your shoulders slightly under the blanket and feel how comfort often begins not with the loud, but the quiet. And the zippers rise. It wasn't heralded by parades or inventions of the year awards. It crept in through pockets, through pouches, through tiny accessories that most people barely noticed, until they did. One quirky anecdote tells of a traveling preacher who received a tobacco pouch as a gift in 1915. He didn't smoke, but he used it to store sermon notes. After a week, he sent a letter to the manufacturer asking for 10 more, calling it the finest invention since the handkerchief. That letter, framed and yellowing, was found in a factory manager's desk in the 1930s. That's how the zipper moved, quietly and almost always forward. Open scholarly debate continues about how many of these early applications were accidental versus strategic. Did manufacturers stumble into the zipper's usefulness, or was it a calculated push into niche markets? Either way, it worked, because people didn't need the zipper to be elegant. They needed it to hold, and hold it did. You sink a little deeper into your bed now, lulled by the steady logic of utility. The zipper may not have conquered corsets or charmed the fashion elite just yet, but it was gaining allies, one pouch at a time. It wouldn't be long now. The room feels heavier now, but not in a bad way. It's the kind of weight that comes from slow accumulation, like snow settling on a rooftop, or pennies filling a jar. That's the zipper's story so far. Quiet victories, no revolutions, just a steady metallic whisper. And now, at last, it begins to hum louder. Tonight, you find yourself walking along a factory floor, not one of towering smokestacks and steam-driven gears, but something sleeker, a test plant maybe, operated by the hookless fastener company. The year is creeping toward 1917. Sundback's version of the zipper is better than ever. The production methods are improving, the product is catching on, and still, no one quite knows what to do with it. So they test. You stroll past a long wooden table where dozens of zipper prototypes lie in tidy rows, some with brass teeth, some with nickel, different slider shapes, rounded, pointed, flared, different tape fabrics, every sample tagged and cataloged. The air smells faintly of oil and starched muslin. At one end of the room, a woman in an apron sews zippers into scraps of fabric with quiet precision. Nearby, a man wearing heavy boots repeatedly opens and closes a pouch. Zizzit, zizzit, zizzit. Testing wear, testing grit, watching for jams. You pick one up and try it yourself. Zit, no, old zit is still oddly satisfying. It was Sundback who, earlier in the decade, had improved the machine that assembled these teeth. His SL machine, short for separable link, could produce a few hundred zippers a day with astonishing accuracy. That might not sound like much today, but in 1970 it was like printing magic. Open scholarly debate still exists around whether Sundback's true genius was in the fastener design or the manufacturing process. The fastener got the credit, but the SL machine made it real. Without it, zippers were still handcrafted toys. With it, they were scalable. Scalability changed everything. With enough production capability, the zipper could now enter new territory, wholesale. You find yourself now inside a showroom, not for customers, but for buyers, a sort of industrial boutique where brands, military buyers, and department store reps examine the newest gear. There's luggage with zippers, canvas jackets with trial fasteners, children's boots, coin purses, travel pouches. You overhear someone say, "It's tidy, mechanical, oddly clever." One buyer from a fledgling apparel company holds up a boot and says, "You think this'll stick?" The other shrugs, "If it doesn't jam." Because that's still the hesitation, not the concept, but the trust. Will it jam? Will it rust? Will people use it? Gyoso. You roll onto your side, your pillow quiet beneath you, and imagine how many conversations must have echoed with that same ambivalence. For every 3 people charmed by the zipper, there were 10 who said, I'll wait. Still, the zippers left the showroom. Orders were placed, small at first, test batches, but consistent. They went into camping gear, into toolkits, into pilot uniforms and medical satchels, into lives. One curious fringe experiment involved early Zeppelin uniforms, custom made with brass zippers for high-altitude missions. The fasteners held. The Zeppelins, not so much. But that's another story. The zippers world was expanding, not because of fanfare, but because it earned its place. Each click of the teeth, each smooth close of a pouch, told a silent truth: this works, and that truth eventually became habit. Your pillow cradles your head like a prototype fabric swatch, soft, pliable, just the right balance of support and give. You're deep now in the zipper story, and the air has changed. It feels more modern, more certain, because tonight you enter a quiet revolution, not led by industry, but by psychology. Dreams, not the ethereal kind, but the kind found in convenience, in the unconscious comfort of something working so seamlessly you barely know it's there. And by 1918, the zipper has begun slipping into those dreams, one subtle tooth at a time. You imagine waking up in a small, takeout apartment above a corner store in Cleveland. It's a Thursday. A woman in her 30s pulls on a house dress. She reaches for her boots, not laced, but zippered. The zipper works. She doesn't think about it. She just goes on with her day. That, right there, is the start of something new: integration. When people stop noticing an invention, that's when it wins. But even as some quietly accepted it, others wondered, what does it mean to use a zipper? Historians still argue whether this was the moment the zipper ceased to be a novelty and became a subconscious habit. There are diary entries, department store ledgers, scattered interviews in early 1920s consumer reports, but nothing definitive. The shift wasn't documented, it simply happened. You shift beneath your blanket and picture a young boy with a school satchel. His mother helps him zip his raincoat. It's the first time she doesn't worry that it'll jam. She smiles, and the zipper, unnoticed, makes the morning smoother. That's how dreams begin, not in thunderclaps, but in seconds saved. Soon, those seconds multiply. Tailors still raise eyebrows, but a few brave ones begin to experiment. One even installs a zipper on the side of a women's skirt and markets it as the garment of the liberated woman. A bold claim, probably too bold, but it sells. A curious magazine column from 1919 raises the question, should women fasten their own clothes? The piece is intended as fashion commentary, but the underlying anxiety is clear because the zipper challenges the very act of dressing as a social performance. Buttons require assistance. Hook and eye demands precision. The zipper, slide, and go. Suddenly, modesty isn't managed, it's personal. This unsettles some, empowers others. And from these quiet debates, cultural meaning begins to cling to the teeth of the fastener. One quirky story tells of a young woman who bought a zippered handbag at a Chicago department store and received a letter from her aunt a week later saying, "I saw it. I worry what it says about you." What it said, no one could define, but it said something. You shift again, the blanket rustling softly as the zipper's psychological footprint expands. Advertisers pick up on this. They begin describing it not just as a product, but as a promise, a modern life, a cleaner silhouette, a garment that hugs closer, but opens quicker. The zipper begins to whisper things like, "You don't need help. You can go out the door faster. You control the opening and the close." Open scholarly debate exists over how much of this subtext was intentional. Some believe early fashion houses embedded liberation into the zipper narrative from the start. Others argue it was consumer-driven, that people themselves imbued the mechanism with meaning. Either way, the meaning stuck. By 1920, quiet pockets of the public began preferring zippers, not loudly, not en masse, but persistently, little by little, like teeth locking into place. Whoop. You drift deeper into your bedding as you picture those early adopters, choosing zippers not because they were trendy, but because they worked. Because they felt like the future, sliding smoothly into the present. The zipper didn't just change clothing, it changed you without ever asking for permission. You're floating now, gently on a current of soft wool and stitched leather, into a world of boots, bags, and bonnets. The zipper, like an overachieving intern in the accessories department, begins to show up in places no one quite expected. It starts with boots, of course, soldiers' boots, workers' boots, then fashionable boots for women, tall and neat and almost impossible to lace without a minor yoga routine. Enter the zipper. You open one, slide it closed. Suddenly, 5 minutes of fumbling becomes 5 seconds of zit. Revolutionary? Not quite. But practical? Hugely. You picture a New York shop assistant demonstrating this miracle to a customer. "It's as easy as pulling a string," she says with a rehearsed smile. The customer's brows lift. She reaches for her coin purse, also zippered. Coincidence? Perhaps, but also the beginning of a pattern. Soon bags of all sorts are being zippered. Duffels, travel pouches, makeup kits, even novelty purses shaped like dachshunds and tennis rackets. These items aren't center stage. They're sideshows, but important ones. The zipper earns its place not by shouting, but by showing up. Historians still argue whether this period, roughly 1918 to 1923, marked the zipper's accessory era. Some scholars call it the phase of cautious adoption, others describe it as the zipper's exile from proper fashion. Either way, it thrived in the margins. One particularly strange entry: baby bonnets. Yes, bonnets. A few enterprising companies began adding zippers to the sides of infant caps, perhaps to make it easier for caregivers to slip them on and off squirming babies. Did it catch on? Not especially. But for a few strange years, zippered baby wear was a real, if short-lived thing. Open scholarly debate still exists around whether this was a response to necessity or simply a marketing experiment that got out of hand. Either way, the images of sleepy infants in bonnets with little brass sliders remain tucked into the back pages of early 1920s catalogs like forgotten dreams. You roll over, head sinking deeper into the pillow as a scene unfolds in a rural dry goods store. A farmer's wife picks up a zippered grain pouch. Sturdy canvas, tight seal, no spillage. She nods. Could use this for sewing bits. She buys two. Her son zips and unzips one repeatedly on the ride home. She tells him to stop before he ruins it. He doesn't stop, and so begins the next chapter. Fascination. Children loved zippers, not for convenience, but for the pure tactile joy. That zit rhythm. It was satisfying, like popping bubble wrap decades before bubble wrap was invented. This simple pleasure helped sell zippered school supplies, lunch satchels, and even pencil cases. You lie there now, drowsy and amused by the idea that an entire industry's success was nudged forward by the same impulse that makes toddlers giggle and adults fidget. Zippers worked, but they also felt good, and gradually, their reliability improved. Sunback's designs were now reinforced with better tape, sturdier sliders, and smoother teeth. Misalignments became rarer. Rust was reduced, still not perfect, but fewer people were getting stuck halfway closed, halfway open. One particularly quirky anecdote: a traveling salesman in the early 1920s used to wear a sample satchel covered in no fewer than 15 zippered compartments. He claimed it made his life easier. Most customers claimed it made him look like a walking suitcase. He didn't care. He sold more than anyone else in his region because if you could show it working, really working, people paid attention. The zipper, once a novelty in boots and bags, was quietly threading its way into the practical imagination. It hadn't yet leapt to the runway, but it was climbing up the shelves. The room is softer now. The air feels like the inside of a velvet coat, warm and faintly perfumed with cedar and starch. Because tonight, dear listener, you step into the storied world of menswear, a realm of lapels, cufflinks, and quiet revolutions stitched just below the belt. Yes, tonight, the zipper turns its gaze toward trousers. You sit in a tailor's fitting room, mahogany walls, soft lighting, and a mirror that seems just slightly judgmental. A middle-aged gentleman stands in his undershirt and slacks, eyeing his reflection while a tailor with pins in his mouth adjusts a hem. There's a pause. Then the tailor, with a conspiratorial nod, produces a pair of trousers fitted with a new type of fly. Not buttons, a zipper. The gentleman furrows his brow. You want me to wear that? The tailor shrugs. It closes faster. Zip, done it silence. Historians still argue whether men's trousers were the zipper's first major fashion triumph or merely a convenient test site. What's clear is this. Something changed in the early 1920s. Tailors, especially those catering to busy city clients, began to see the appeal. Men wanted simplicity. They wanted to dress quickly, and above all, they wanted to look like they didn't fuss with their clothes. Buttons required fumbling. Zippers, zit, and done. You imagine a Wall Street man late for a morning meeting. He grabs his trousers, skips the morning coffee, pulls the fly shut in half a second, and races out the door. He might not even notice what made his morning easier, but he'll remember the smoothness. The adoption wasn't overnight. Some tailors resisted. They argued zippers looked mechanical, lacked tradition, or might startle the help. There were jokes about mishaps. One cheeky columnist warned that too much speed in the fly area may lead to unfortunate entanglements. Still, the fastener advanced. Open scholarly debate continues over the exact moment the zipper crossed the threshold into respectable menswear. Some credit French designers, others point to a specific department store promotion in New York. Regardless, by the late 1920s, zippered flies were no longer shocking, just efficient, and men love efficiency. The major shift came when one particularly influential menswear magazine ran a side-by-side comparison, buttoned versus zippered trousers. Time saved, several seconds per wear. Ease of use, zippers won handily. A sidebar column declared finally a modern man's approach to modesty. Modesty, that word again, because the zipper wasn't just practical, it was discreet. Fewer gaps, fewer chances for a button to pop at an inopportune moment. Tidy, clean, hidden. You settle deeper into your bedding, imagining the quiet triumph of an innovation that promised not flair, but subtlety. And when major clothing retailers noticed, that's when things took off. Brands began offering lines of slacks and trousers labeled quick fly or slide closure. It sounded sleek. Gentlemen's outfitters leaned into it. No more fiddling, one ad promised, over an illustration of a man confidently walking down a city street, briefcase in hand, wind in his lapels, zipper firmly shut. One quirky story from this period. A tailor in Cincinnati reportedly fitted an entire wedding party with zippered tuxedos, but the mechanism failed during a particularly energetic dance number, leading to what can only be described as a wardrobe malfunction chorus line. Still, the groomsmen said they preferred the zippers overall. Mistakes were tolerated, progress was made, and slowly the stigma faded. The zipper, once a curiosity in boots and bags, was now a standard in slacks, no longer hiding in purses or infant bonnets, now front and center, bold but silent, not fast. You lie there, the fabric of the dream smoothing out beneath your thoughts, and you realize the zipper didn't conquer menswear with style. It conquered it with speed, and the promise that no one would ever notice it was there. You're swaddled now in the calm hush of twilight. Pillow soft beneath your ear, the blanket a gentle weight pressing you into dreams. And the zipper, like any rising star, begins to flirt with fame. Not the kind with red carpets just yet, but the type of fame found in glossy catalogs and the polite admiration of department store mannequins. It's the 1920s, and the fastener is ready for its close-up. Tonight, you find yourself in the bustling main floor of a Bloomingdale's, or a Sears, or perhaps a regional retailer with a big city attitude. Mahogany display cases gleam, sales clerks glide across marble tiles, and in the new essentials section, right next to the sanforized shirts and aluminum curlers, you spot it, a garment with a zipper, properly displayed, nicely lit, not hidden. It's a jacket maybe, or a skirt with a subtle side seam, or even, brace yourself, a children's snowsuit. You pick it up, run your fingers along the tape, and hear the quiet zit as it slides. It feels normal. That's new. Historians still argue whether it was department stores or catalogs that gave the zipper its public breakthrough. Some say the first successful retail test came from a Chicago coat promotion, Others credit a Montreal back-to-school line featuring zippered knickerbockers. Either way, this was the turning point. Not invention, not function, but marketing, because the moment something lands in a store window, it becomes part of the story shoppers tell themselves. "Look how modern I am," they say, stepping into a fastened coat. "I'm not stuck in buttons anymore." Department stores leaned in hard. Display signage showed clean silhouettes with taglines like, "Fasten your fashion, slide into style," and in one bold case, "Who needs buttons?" The zipper had arrived on Main Street, but it still needed a name. That wouldn't come until 1923, when B.F. Goodrich, yes, the tire company, used Sundback's fastener on a line of rubber boots and coined the name that would stick forever, zipper. Legend has it that someone in the marketing department described the sound the fastener made and said, "Let's call it the zipper. That's what it does." A naming miracle, really? Snappy, literal, and oddly fun to say. You imagine the moment, a cluttered desk, an ad executive mumbling, "Zip, zipper, yeah, that works." And it did. It worked. And soon enough, zipper was everywhere. In product listings, in fashion copy, in conversation. You roll gently, the word still humming in your ears, zipper, zipper. The syllables slide over your tongue like the teeth of the device itself. One quirky tidbit from the time. In its earliest usage, zipper was used more often to describe the product it was on than the mechanism itself. Zipper boots, zipper bags, zipper coats. Only later did it become the universal shorthand for the fastener. Open scholarly debate continues over whether the term zipper was trademarked with full intention or stumbled into popularity like a catchphrase that nobody meant to stick. Or regardless, it spread fast, faster than the fastener itself. Department stores doubled down. Promotions featured models demonstrating the zipping action live in store windows. You can just picture it. A poised young man standing still while a salesperson dramatically zips up his jacket in front of an audience. Applause optional, but welcome. Children's clothing embraced the zipper with particular enthusiasm. Mothers were promised faster dressing, fewer tears, less button loss, zipper rompers, zipper jackets, zip-fast overalls. One ad even showed a child dressed entirely in zippers from neck to ankle, promising full closure in under 12 seconds, which, depending on the child, may or may not have been true. And slowly, inevitably, the zipper lost its weirdness. It became expected. You settle again. The edges of your thoughts soft as wool-lined pockets. The zipper, finally named, had crossed into mainstream fashion, not loudly, not brashly, but with the quiet authority of something that works. And now that it had a name, it had power. You breathe evenly now, adrift on a sea of down feathers and half-lit thoughts, and the zipper glides along beside you, steadily, gently, into the world of high fashion. Not just bags and boots anymore, not just coats hung near the clearance rack. Tonight, the zipper strolls into the atelier. It's Paris, or Milan, or maybe a quiet London studio with thread on the floor and dress forms crowding the walls. A young designer, perhaps too bold for their own good, stands in front of a half-finished dress, silk crepe, hand-dyed, beautiful, and instead of a concealed row of mother-of-pearl buttons, there's a glint of brass teeth running up the side seam. A zipper. Madness? Maybe. But it worked. In 1930, Elsa Schiaparelli, one of fashion's more gloriously strange and fearless minds, debuted garments that dared to show the zipper, not just include it, not just hide it, but display it unapologetically as a design element. On dresses, on sleeves, on necklines that didn't quite behave. Historians still argue whether Schiaparelli was the first to treat the zipper as couture-worthy. Some credit earlier, lesser-known tailors in Parisian fringe salons. Others insist Schiaparelli made it popular precisely because she didn't care if it offended. She wanted it to, and her rivals noticed. Imagine the scandal. Zippers were visible, deliberate, suggestive even, because a visible zipper doesn't just fasten, it implies opening. Movement, change. In the fashion world, that implication was electric. You roll over in bed, the blankets settling around you, as you picture socialites at a salon, whispering over cocktails about that garish little slider, ruining an otherwise lovely gown. And yet they couldn't stop looking at it. That was the point. The zipper became a design detail, a punctuation mark. By the early 1930s, Paris was quietly divided. Classic houses stuck to their hook and eye rituals, their delicate loops, but others leaned into it. Young designers who had grown up reading about aviation and fast cars and space rockets, speed, saw the zipper as a symbol, a statement. You weren't just wearing a dress, you were wearing modernity. A fashion column from 1932 titled "The Slide into Style" praised the zipper's sleek silhouette and clean closure. The writer gushed about the way it sliced through fabric like a seam made of light. A bit much, sure, but enthusiasm was building. Meanwhile, in America, ready-to-wear fashion was catching on. Department stores couldn't afford the time and labor of precise buttons. Zippers saved time on the sewing floor and gave consumers something new to talk about. Futuristic, some said. Risky, others muttered. Open scholarly debate continues about whether designers used the zipper out of love or necessity. Some saw it as a rebellion, others simply liked the speed. Either way, its presence on the runway helped shift the conversation from utility to style. One quirky anecdote from this era tells of a French actress whose dress zipper jammed just before curtain call. She went on stage with the slider halfway up her back, held together by 2 safety pins and a lot of confidence. Critics loved the show. The next week, the half-zipped look appeared in a fashion magazine spread titled "Undone and Divine," and so even its flaws were fashionable. You shift slightly, as if your blanket is now stitched with tiny brass teeth, gently holding you in place. The zipper no longer belonged to dusty utility catalogs. It lived in Vogue, in vanity mirrors, in the small, breathless pause before a model stepped onto the runway. Fashion had embraced the fastener, not grudgingly, but glamorously. It shimmered, it moved, it dared. And just like that, the zipper, once scorned, once doubted, was now a little bit sexy. You shift deeper into your pillow now, wrapped in the soft folds of dreams and fabric, as the zipper, newly chic, freshly endorsed, slides into the most competitive closet of all, children's clothing, and oh, what a battlefield that is. It's the early 1930s. Picture it. A harried mother in a small apartment, a squirming child in one hand, and a tiny shoe in the other. The child won't sit still. Buttons scatter like popcorn across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a school bell rings. There's shouting, there's bargaining, there's a minor bribe involving hard candy. Enter the zipper. One swift motion, zit, and the coat is closed. The shoe, secure. The tantrum, averted. A miracle? No. Just a tiny line of teeth, clicking into place like a sigh of relief. Historians still argue whether this era marked the zipper's true popular explosion or simply its most dramatic marketing push. What's clear is this. The 1930s were the decade when the zipper became a parental strategy. It started with children's coats. Outerwear manufacturers seized on the pitch. No more chilly buttons, no more dressing fights. The zipper was advertised as a shortcut to sanity, and honestly, it kind of was. You curl deeper under the blanket as you imagine those early ads, rosy-cheeked children zipped up snug, holding hands on icy sidewalks, while harried moms wave cheerfully from doorways. Reality, probably less photogenic, but the zippers, they held, and children loved them, not because they saved time, but because they were fun, tactile, strange. You could play with them. You could zip them halfway and pretend you were a robot. You could get them stuck on purpose just to see what would happen. One quirky newspaper column from 1934 tells of a 5-year-old who zipped and unzipped his new coat 113 times in one afternoon. When the zipper finally gave out, his response was, "Do it again." Kids, the original stress testers. Soon, the zipper migrated from coats to shoes, then boots, then coveralls. Suddenly, parents were choosing clothes not for color or cost, but for speed of dressing. The zipper became shorthand for simplicity, and then came the big endorsement. In 1937, the American children's clothing industry, led by several prominent brands, declared the zipper the most child-friendly invention of the year. That same year, a survey in Parents magazine asked readers to vote on most useful modern convenience. The zipper placed just behind the electric toaster. High praise. Open scholarly debate continues about whether the rise in zippered children's clothing was driven by market testing or full-blown parental exhaustion. Maybe both, but it worked, and it stuck. Manufacturers began including little diagrams in packaging, how to guide the slider, how to unstick a snag, how to oil a jammed tooth. Parents became zipper mechanics, children zipper enthusiasts, and the clothing changed too. Designers embraced new possibilities. Jumpsuits, one-piece snowsuits, dresses with back zips so seamless they looked like magic. The zipper didn't just simplify clothing, it transformed it. You pull the blanket higher, remembering your own first jacket, maybe with a tiny cloth tab on the slider, easy for clumsy fingers to grasp. The sound of that first zit is etched into millions of childhood memories, like a lullaby made of brass. And just like that, the zipper became not just functional, not just fashionable, but familiar. A part of growing up, a part of dressing down, a little ribbon of teeth teaching independence, one gentle tug at a time. You're floating now in a soft cotton sea, blankets tucked, limbs warm, thoughts loose, as the zipper takes its boldest step yet. No longer content to seal pockets, coats, or the occasional avant-garde gown, it now aims for a new frontier. Intimates. Yes. Tonight, the zipper slips into underwear, not all at once, not loudly, but with the quiet confidence of an idea that knows it's scandalous and also inevitable. It's the late 1930s. You find yourself inside a department store's lingerie section, where everything smells faintly of lavender sachets and starch. On a velvet-lined display stand rests something new, a girdle with a zippered closure. You look left and right. Is anyone watching? You reach out. You tug the tiny brass tab. Zip. Still it opens. Zip. It closes. Suddenly, the room feels just a little more daring. Historians still argue whether zippered undergarments were invented for comfort, aesthetics, or sheer audacity. Likely it was all three. The brassiere and girdle industries were booming. Manufacturers were seeking ways to streamline closures, reduce dressing times, and, let's be honest, sell excitement. Hook and eye closures, though dependable, were fiddly, and snaps could dig in. Buttons were lumpy beneath thin fabrics. But a zipper, smooth, efficient, sleek, and provocative. After all, a zippered dress said something. A zippered undergarment said something else entirely. Fashion editors called them modern miracles. Moralists grumbled. One clergyman reportedly called the zippered girdle a slippery slope to moral chaos, which likely helped boost sales. You shift beneath the blanket, amused that a tiny mechanical device could cause such fuss. But then again, clothing has never been just clothing. By 1938, zippered undergarments were being marketed not just for ease, but for allure. Ads promised one swift motion to freedom, a smoother silhouette, and modern confidence in your control garments. They walked a fine line between utility and flirtation. One particularly quirky design even featured a double zipper, one on each side, so the wearer could choose which direction to slide from. Critics called it confusing. Customers called it fun. Open scholarly debate continues over how widespread zippered lingerie truly was before World War II. Some claim it was mostly an urban trend, popular in big cities like Chicago and New York. Others believe it had deeper roots in Paris, where boundary-pushing couture often trickled into underthings long before it hit outerwear. Regardless, the impact was clear. The zipper, long seen as mechanical and masculine, now had a softer side. It had made its way into the most personal of garments, redefining not just fashion, but function. Manufacturers took note. They began offering zippered sleepwear, zippered slips, even speed bloomers. Yes, those existed. The promise? You'd be dressed or undressed in seconds. Some loved it. Others missed the ritual of laces and hooks. There were those who argued that speed removed the romance, that the slow act of dressing was part of the charm. But the world was changing. Fast was fashionable, and the zipper, well, it didn't ask for permission. It just kept closing the gap, 1 inch at a time. You shift again, your blanket now the imagined weight of silk and brass teeth, and smile at the thought. Somewhere, someone in 1939 zipped their girdle with a tiny grin and a whole new outlook. You lie still now, cushioned in the hushed pocket of night, as the zipper, emboldened and worldly, finds itself caught in something far greater than fashion or flirtation. War. Yes, tonight the zipper marches into World War II. It's the early 1940s, and the world is unraveling faster than anyone can stitch it back together. And while nations are drafting soldiers and rationing food, another kind of drafting is happening behind the scenes. The race to equip millions of men and women with uniforms, gear, and garments. Fast. And who better to help than our little friend with teeth? You blink into the soft dark, and suddenly you're in a military supply depot. The air is heavy with oil and canvas. Long tables are stacked with folded jumpsuits, parachute packs, first aid pouches. Soldiers move quickly. Everything here must be durable, efficient, and quick to access in an emergency. And there, between straps and snaps, zippers. Not hidden now, not decorative, not cute, essential. Flight suits, especially, became zipper territory. Pilots needed to get in and out fast. High-altitude flying required warmth and pressure. Ready gear, a zippered suit meant fewer delays, less fuss, one tug, stay, and you were sealed into your second skin. Historians still argue whether military adoption was the zipper's defining moment or merely its industrial confirmation. Either way, this was where skepticism died. The zipper wasn't just fashionable, it was functional under fire. The U.S. military even issued new specs for zippers: minimum tensile strength, resistance to salt corrosion, ease of operation with gloves. Zipper makers, Talon, Lightning, and others, rose to the challenge. One quirky wartime anecdote involves a batch of faulty zippers on field jackets in the Pacific Theater. Soldiers improvised by swapping them with boot zippers. When inspected later, officers noted functionally unorthodox, but highly effective. Translation, it worked. Zippers were sewn into tents, backpacks, ammo belts, and winter coats. Female factory workers in the U.S. wore jumpsuits with central front zippers, practical, rugged, iconic. Rosie the Riveter, she zipped, you sink further into your blankets, the image of thousands of tiny sliders moving in unison like metal ants, opening, closing, holding the world together in seams and stitches. Even parachutes were fitted with zippers, sometimes not for the canopy, but for the pack, allowing faster deployment or easier repacking. Some even had emergency pull tabs, designed for a one-handed tug in moments of panic. The zipper became a symbol not of convenience, but of readiness. Open scholarly debate continues over whether the mass production of zippers during W. Wood set the global manufacturing standard that made it ubiquitous post-war. Some argue it was inevitable. Others insist it was war that pushed the zipper from nice to have to can't live without. And here's something stranger. Zippers helped in espionage. Yes, truly. There were rumors, some proven, that spies used hollow zipper pulls to hide microfilm. Others stitched coded messages into the seams, flanking zippered pouches. One known design included a zipper embedded in a seemingly plain boot, which concealed a transmitter coil. James Bond, eat your heart out. As wartime demand increased, metal became precious. Some manufacturers began experimenting with synthetic zipper teeth. Early plastics, molded blends, not always reliable, not always pretty, but light and fast. And the zipper adapted. That's what it always did, adapted. You exhale slowly now, comforted by the idea that even something as small as a zipper could rise to meet history's hardest hour, not with heroism, but with usefulness. No speeches, no banners, just the quiet promise that, no matter the chaos, at least your trousers would stay shut and your flight suit would seal. In war, that was enough. You breathe deeper now, drawn by the warm gravity of sleep, as the world begins to heal, rebuild, and just like the zipper, ease itself back into civilian life. The war ends, almost cities light up again. Factories slowly pivot from uniforms to leisure wear. The tone shifts from urgency to elegance, from survival to style, and the zipper, hardened by service, comes home. Tonight, you walk into a post-war department store in downtown Los Angeles. The air smells faintly of linoleum, popcorn, and newness. Ladies in gloves browse racks of pastel dresses. Gentlemen inspect suits with narrow lapels. And in nearly every aisle, there it is, that glimmering curve of brass or nickel or painted aluminum, zippers in every direction. Children's jackets, teenagers' jeans, or house dresses, bathing suits. Suddenly, everything zips. Historians still argue whether it was mass production, shifting gender roles, or just a weary world's craving for convenience that solidified the zipper's domination of everyday fashion. But whatever the cause, by the late 1940s, the zipper wasn't just accepted, it was expected. One particularly popular innovation, the zippered cocktail dress. Yes, you're imagining it correctly. Sleek silhouette, hidden side zip. A woman could slip it on alone. No need to summon a friend to fasten 19 tiny buttons. Independence in one motion. Fashion magazines declared it a quiet miracle for modern women. Quiet indeed. You picture a woman zipping herself up before a dinner party, confident, composed, one hand behind her back, the other balancing a glass of sherry. Meanwhile, men's trousers were now almost entirely zippered. Button flies became the mark of vintage purists or overly traditional tailors. The younger crowd wanted speed. Work ad campaign from 1947 featured a man timing himself, dressing for work, from boxers to blazer in 90 seconds. It bragged, thanks to zippers. The illustration showed stopwatch numbers overlaid with smiling models in varying stages of zipped-up readiness. Jeans, once the rugged workwear of miners and ranch hands, also made the shift. Levi's, Wrangler, and Lee began offering zippered options, much to the horror of denim purists. Still, they sold, and they sold fast. Open scholarly debate continues over whether zippers genuinely improved clothing fit or simply offered illusionary benefits. Some designers insisted that zippers allowed closer tailoring, less gaping, more security. Others said the difference was minimal, that the zipper was psychological, an emblem of efficiency in a jittery post-war world. Whatever the truth, America was zipping up, Europe too. In Paris, zippers now adorned chic coats, pencil skirts, even men's briefcases. In Tokyo, a rising fashion industry embraced them as markers of modernism. In Australia, a post-war surge in surf culture saw zippers sewn into board shorts and windbreakers. You adjust under your covers, the sound of millions of tiny sliders echoing faintly in the chambers of memory, each zip a sigh, a statement, a step forward. Manufacturers innovated too, new slider designs, new pull shapes, coated teeth to prevent corrosion. Some companies even experimented with color matching, offering zippers in every shade of the rainbow. Suddenly, the zipper wasn't just a function, it was part of the look. And then came the zipper in home goods, slip covers, cushion covers, suitcases, sleeping bags, beanbag chairs, a small design revolution hiding in plain sight. One delightfully odd development, the zip-in bedspread, a novelty product where the comforter zipped into place like a sleeping bag. It flopped commercially. Apparently people weren't quite ready to zip into bed like astronauts. Still, the idea lingered. The zipper was no longer confined to a garment's edge. It was part of the whole experience. You yawn now, the world of the 1940s folding gently around you like freshly pressed linen. The war was over. The future had arrived, and the zipper, humble and smooth, had claimed its place in every drawer, every closet, every quick-dress morning rush, no longer a novelty, no longer a gamble, just there. And isn't that the best kind of victory? The night has gone quiet now, your breath slow and steady, the weight of the covers like a gentle reminder that everything eventually finds its place. And the zipper, it's everywhere now, in closets, in cars, in canvas tents pitched under stars. But tonight, it makes its next unexpected move into culture, yes. Welcome to the era of zipper symbolism. It's the 1950s and 60s. The world is turning technicolor. Teenagers have money. Advertisers have nerve. And clothing is no longer just clothing. It's a billboard, a battleground, a declaration. And in the middle of it all, the zipper. You walk down a city street in 1955. A motorcycle idles at the corner. A boy leans against it. Black leather jacket zipped halfway up. Hair slicked. Boots scuffed. Attitude unmistakable. He isn't just wearing a jacket. He's becoming someone. That jacket? Marlon Brando made it famous. And the zipper running across his chest at a rakish angle isn't just about closure anymore. It's about rebellion. Historians still argue whether the zipper's role in the rise of youth counterculture was intentional. Some believe fashion designers simply liked the look. Others point to a cultural fascination with industrial aesthetics, gear, speed, danger, whatever the truth. By the mid-century mark, the zipper had become cool and a little dangerous. Fashion followed. Zippers showed up in pairs, in diagonals, in unexpected places. Dresses with zippers down the front, boots with zippers curling around the calf, denim jackets with too many pockets, each sealed tight. You turn over slowly, picturing the 1960s, Andy Warhol's Sticky Fingers album for the Rolling Stones, released in 1971, but dreamt of during this cultural pivot. The album cover, a photo of a man in tight jeans with a working zipper. The kind of detail that makes parents sigh and teenagers smirk. Yes, the zipper had become suggestive. Not loud, not explicit, but full of implication. One quirky pop culture moment. A 1960s game show contestant was asked to name an item of clothing associated with speed. Without hesitation, he answered, zippers. The audience roared. The host chuckled. It wasn't the top answer, but it wasn't wrong. Open scholarly debate continues over whether the zipper truly changed the way people expressed sexuality and identity through dress, or whether it simply benefited from the era's broader shifts. But the timing was perfect, and the symbolism was potent. Zippers meant access. Zippers meant speed. Zippers meant you weren't dressing the way your parents did. Even in children's media, the zipper appeared more playfully. Puppets had zippered mouths. Dolls had zippered clothes. Lunchboxes came with zippered pockets. Something to fidget with, something tactile, something fun, zit, zit, zip. Still the same rhythm, still satisfying. Manufacturers leaned in. AD campaigns described zippers as streamlined, electric, even revolutionary. A 1959 slogan for a line of dresses read, "One tug and you're ready for the world." Subtle? Not exactly. You relax, letting that line drift through your thoughts like steam. One tug and you're ready for the world. The zipper, once feared, now flirted, and not just with fashion, but with technology. Suitcases had zippers. Stereo cases had zippers. Portable radios came with zippered sleeves. And eventually, by the end of the 1960s, the zipper would land somewhere no one expected. A spacesuit, but we'll save that for later. Tonight, you linger here, in a world where one line of metal teeth could carry so much meaning, where closing something didn't just fasten it. It said something. You're not buttoned up. You're zipped in, fast, clean, ready. You're nearly there now, drifting in the cottony quiet of late-night thoughts. And the zipper, your small, steady companion, takes you one last place before the wind down begins. Not into history, not into fashion, but into space. Yes, tonight the zipper lifts off. It's the late 1960s, and the race to the moon is in full throttle. NASA engineers pore over designs for spacesuits, equipment bags, pressurized compartments. Every element is scrutinized, every ounce of weight, every fold of fabric. And somewhere, on a drafting table surrounded by carbon paper and coffee mugs, sits a sketch, a zipper, not a department store zipper, a space-rated zipper, because as odd as it sounds, zippers had a place in the final frontier. Early NASA suits used zippers, specially reinforced ones, often double or triple lined, for donning and doffing the bulky pressurized layers astronauts needed to survive. These weren't your average coat zippers. These were built to seal airtight, to withstand vacuum, to lock out death. It's no pressure. Historians still argue whether the decision to use zippers in suits, like those worn in the Mercury and Gemini missions, was driven by familiarity, functionality, or sheer lack of better alternatives. What is known? They worked, mostly. You imagine it now, Buzz Aldrin zipping his outer suit. One firm zest sealing him inside. Final checks, radio crackling, a spacecraft humming nearby. The most famous walk in history made in zippered pants. NASA partnered with manufacturers like B.F. Goodrich to develop zipper designs that could hold under pressure. Metal teeth were coated, sliders reinforced, and secondary seals added for extra protection. Some suits had zippers as long as 35 inches, curved around the torso like a careful question mark. One quirky footnote. A zipper jam nearly delayed a training exercise during the Gemini program. A test astronaut couldn't seal his suit fully. The culprit, a grain of sand lodged in the track. Engineers changed the suit room's flooring the next day. From then on, tile only, no grit allowed. And it wasn't just suits. Zippers were used in gear bags, capsule pouches, toolkits. One Apollo mission reportedly carried over 24 zippered storage units, each designed to open quietly. In zero-G NASA even had guidelines for operating zippers with thick gloves. Tug tabs were enlarged. Tracks were tested at sub-zero temperatures. Open scholarly debate continues over whether zippers were ever a liability in space. Most agree they were dependable, but not without risk. One engineer famously quipped, "A jammed zipper in orbit is one of those problems you only want to solve before it happens." Back on Earth, space-hungry consumers took notice. By 1970, fashion catalogs featured space jackets with diagonal zips and metallic finishes. Toy manufacturers made astro bags with NASA-style sliders. Zippers were no longer just practical, they were futuristic. You lie still, smiling faintly at the absurd brilliance of it all. A little line of metal teeth, once ridiculed, now trusted in orbit, because the zipper wasn't just useful, it was universal. From infants' onesies to lunar missions, from war trenches to Fifth Avenue runways. It crossed borders, cultures, and professions, without fanfare, without ego, just a quiet promise that what you closed would stay closed. You take one more breath in the dark, letting the image settle in, a lone astronaut in a dimly lit capsule, zipping his gear pouch shut before sleep. Even in space, someone's still going zit before lights out. You're suspended now in the warm gravity of near sleep, every breath a slow unraveling, and here comes the zipper's final chapter, not the end of its story, but the settling of it, a gentle slide into the background where all familiar things go. Tonight, you walk into your own closet, yes, yours. Trousers neatly hung, dresses zipped at the side, hoodies stacked like soft shells, each atom with a zipper, silent, humble, ready. You reach out, slide one open, that small, satisfying sound. You know it by heart, you've known it forever. But this wasn't always the case. You think back now through the decades we've traveled together, from those hesitant boots in 1913 to the fashion runways of the 30s to the launch pads of the space age. You've zipped with soldiers, with school children, with Parisian debutantes and factory workers and astronauts drifting in low orbit. And through it all, the zipper has stayed the same. A line of teeth, a little metal tab, a promise. Historians still argue whether the zipper is the greatest unsung invention of the 20th century or simply the quietest. It didn't start revolutions, it didn't cure disease, but it made the world faster, neater, easier, and perhaps that's why it endures. In modern times, it has adapted. Plastic coils instead of metal teeth, invisible zips, waterproof versions, double sliders. You've zipped tents in the rain, duffel bags at airports, winter coats against snow. Every time, that same soft zit, that instant feeling of closed. One quirky modern fact. There's a company in Japan that handcrafts luxury zippers, gold-plated, custom-tuned for smoothness, designed for designer bags that cost more than a car. There's a market, apparently, for high-end zipping. Of course there is. Today, zippers live in every corner of life. In sports gear, camera bags, laptop sleeves, hiking boots, even underwater suits for deep sea divers. They climb Everest. They run through Olympic uniforms. They open pencil cases in first grade and seal your favorite hoodie when you're cold. Open scholarly debate. Now focuses not on if the zipper changed the world, but how often we forget that it did, because that's the zipper's final magic trick. It becomes invisible, so seamless in your day that you forget how strange it once seemed, how much skepticism it faced, how it zipped its way through politics, through propriety, through culture, until it just stayed. You nestle now into the folds of your pillow, the room still, the nightgown deep, your hoodie zipped, your suitcase packed, your pockets sealed. And the zipper, it sleeps too. So now, as the lights dim a little more and the rhythm of your breath softens, let's let the zipper rest. Let all those tiny teeth relax, each one interlocked with its partner, just as they've done for over a century. Imagine a jacket folded neatly, a tent flap gently sealed against cool mountain air, or a suitcase slowly zipped shut after a long, joyful trip. These aren't just closures. They're comfort to security, the soft click of the world making sense. You don't have to remember every date. You don't have to keep every detail. Just carry this one quiet truth, that even the smallest inventions, the least glamorous, the most overlooked, can shape your days more than the loudest headlines, more than the brightest neon. Let your thoughts float now to all those simple zips in your life, coat to coat, bag to bag, each one a thread connecting you to the past. You're part of that legacy too, and now it's time to let it all slide away. Let the noise of the day slip down like a slider on a well-worn track. Let your muscles loosen, your thoughts unfurl. No tugging, no snagging, just the glide of sleep welcoming you home. A soft breath in, a gentler one out, the zipper's closed, and so is this story. Good night.